My name is Lydia Harcourt. I'm 68 years old. The late afternoon light slanted across the Blue Ridge Mountains as the taxi rolled through Asheville's quiet streets. The air smelled like rain and magnolia, familiar, yet somehow distant, as if the city had moved on during the week I'd spent visiting my sister in Vermont. I'd expected to come home to laughter, maybe Mark's booming voice calling out from the kitchen. But as the driver turned onto Biltmore Street, a heaviness settled in my chest. Our house, a graceful old colonial, Robert and I had bought 35 years ago, stood still under the dim sky. The curtains were drawn. The porch light, which Mark always kept on, stayed dark. "Here's fine," I said softly, handing the driver a few bills. He wished me a nice evening, but the word nice felt misplaced. The key turned easily in the lock. Inside, the air was different. The faint warmth of cinnamon and coffee that usually lingered after Lauren's baking had vanished. Silence spread through the rooms, thick and cautious, like something waiting to be named. I wheeled my small suitcase into the foyer and called out. "Mark Lauren." No answer. I moved down the hallway toward the living room. The old clock ticked on the wall, each sound landing heavier than the last. Then I saw them. Mark sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, still wearing his office clothes. Navy suit, loosened tie, the look of a man trapped in a conversation he didn't want to have. Lauren perched beside him, immaculate as ever, her blonde hair swept into a perfect knot, her phone face down on the coffee table. She glanced up first. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," Mark said finally, rising halfway before sinking back down again. "You're home early. I told you I'd be back today," I said, setting my purse on the armchair. "Where's Henry? Is he at soccer practice?" Lauren smoothed an invisible crease on her skirt. "He's at a friend's house. We thought it'd be better if he wasn't here for this, for what I asked." The silence stretched. Mark rubbed his forehead. There's something we need to talk about. It's about Dad's estate. The lawyer called while you were away." My pulse stumbled. Robert's will had been settled months ago or so, I thought. "I see," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Then let's talk." Lauren's gaze flicked toward Mark. She crossed her legs, her heels clicking against each other. The gesture was small but sharp, like a metronome, setting the tempo for bad news. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. The only sound was the clock marking time in uneven beats. "You just got back," he said finally. "Maybe you'd like to rest first." "No," I said, sitting opposite them. "Whatever this is, I'd rather hear it now." For a long moment, no one spoke. I watched the way Mark's hands clenched together, the way Lauren's eyes glittered with something that wasn't sympathy. A faint chill slid through me, the kind that comes before a storm. Mark reached for a thick manila envelope on the table. His fingers trembled slightly as he held it out to me. "This came from Dad's attorney," he said. "There were final details." The envelope was heavier than I expected. I set it in my lap, its weight pulsing like a heartbeat. "Final details?" I asked quietly. Mark hesitated, and Lauren's painted smile returned, tight, deliberate, rehearsed. "Yes," she said. "It seems Robert left a few surprises, and just like that, the house no longer felt like home." Mark didn't sit back down right away. He paced once across the rug, his hands pressed together as if he were trying to rehearse the words before they left his mouth. I waited, my fingers resting lightly on the envelope, though I already knew nothing good came in thick paper like this. "Mom," he began, "I need you to understand something first. This isn't personal. It's just how Dad set things up." Lauren leaned forward slightly, her perfume floating across the table, a bright, sharp citrus scent that made the air feel tighter. "It's really all quite straightforward," she said, her voice smooth, almost cheerful. Mark shot her a look, that was meant to quiet her, but she didn't flinch. He cleared his throat. Dad's attorney called last week. There were some final adjustments to the estate. Apparently, he'd left specific instructions for the distribution of property. I felt the air leave the room. Specific instructions. He nodded. The penthouse in Miami, the one you and Dad used for vacations, it goes to me. I stared at him for a long moment, waiting for more, for the part where he'd tell me there'd been some mistake. Robert had adored that place. We'd spent 20 summers there repairing old furniture together, watching thunderstorms over Biscayne Bay. It was where he'd told me he wanted his ashes scattered. Mark kept talking too quickly now. It's just practical, Mom. Lauren and I can maintain it, keep it in the family, and, well, it's already under my name for the taxes, so it makes sense. Lauren's smile deepened. It's really a lot to manage for someone your age, she said lightly. You wouldn't want that kind of responsibility hanging over you. I didn't answer. My eyes drifted to the envelope again. And what about me? Mark hesitated, then exhaled. Dad left you the cabin, the one up in the Blue Ridge, he said, the old family place. It's smaller, simpler. Lauren's voice slipped in before he could finish. It's perfect, really. Quiet, peaceful, and very manageable. I imagine you'll love it up there. I could hear the faint tremor in my own breathing. The cabin. The place Robert and I hadn't visited in decades, not since our honeymoon. It had always been his project, a relic more than a home. The roof leaked. The floors creaked. It was a memory, not a future. Mark tried to meet my eyes, but couldn't. Dad must have thought it'd be a good fit for you, Mom. A place to relax, maybe start fresh. Lauren's tone sharpened with feigned sympathy. It's charming, really. Remote, yes, but that might be good for you. Peace and quiet. Fewer distractions. The words landed one by one, heavy as stones. I could still hear Robert's voice in memory, steady, deliberate, telling me everything would be all right, that he'd taken care of me. Yet here I was, holding a piece of paper that turned 43 years of marriage into a real estate transaction. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. Please don't be upset. It's just property. Nothing changes between us. But everything already had. The way he stood across from me, not as my son, but as the new owner of what used to be ours, told me more than any will could. I folded my hands in my lap, forcing my voice to stay calm. I see, I said. Well, I suppose that's that then. Lauren rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt, a faint smile touching her lips. You'll see, Lydia. The mountains are beautiful this time of year. I nodded slowly, though my chest felt hollow. Somewhere between the words estate and distribution, I'd stopped being family and become an afterthought. And across from me, my son couldn't even look me in the eye. For a long time after Mark spoke, none of us moved. The envelope sat between us like something alive, pulsing with all the words left unsaid. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old clock, the world continuing as if nothing had just shifted. Lauren broke the silence first. Honestly, Lydia, she said, her voice light, almost amused, I think Robert made a sensible choice. The cabin really does suit you. Peaceful, simple, and a little rustic. Rustic, I repeated quietly. She crossed one leg over the other, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Well, you always liked your little projects, gardening, sewing, that sort of thing. You can fix it up, maybe start a vegetable patch. It'll give you something to do. Mark shifted uneasily on the couch. Lauren, but she didn't stop. And it's safer, really. That Miami place is high maintenance. Elevators, city noise, all that travel. The mountains are calm. For someone your age, it's perfect. Something in me snapped, not with anger, but disbelief. For someone my age, I said. She blinked, feigning surprise. Oh, don't take it that way. I just mean it's appropriate. I imagine it's cozy, even if it's a bit dusty. Her lips curved into a small smile, too deliberate to be innocent. Then she looked straight at me, her tone dropping soft and venomous. In a way, it fits you perfectly, you old woman. The words landed before I could breathe. A silence deeper than any I'd ever known filled the room. I felt my face grow hot, not from shame, but from something worse. Humiliation dressed as politeness. Mark's head jerked up. "Lauren," he said sharply. "What?" she asked, her voice dripping with false confusion. "I'm only being honest." I stared at my son. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd stand up, tell her to stop, remind her who I was. But he didn't. His shoulders sagged, his gaze fell to the floor, and the only sound was the faint creak of the chair beneath him. "Mark," I said quietly, "is this really how you both see me?" He swallowed hard. "Mom, no, you're twisting it." Lauren didn't mean, "Oh," I meant every word she interrupted with a small laugh. "You deserve something peaceful, Lydia, a place that matches your pace of life." The laughter stopped abruptly when I rose from my chair. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavy with everything that had finally been spoken aloud. I looked at them, my son who couldn't meet my eyes, and his wife whose satisfaction hung in the air like perfume. I thought of the day Lauren had joined our family, radiant in white, her hand tucked into Mark's arm. I'd welcomed her as my own, cooked her favorite meals, shared Robert's wine collection with her, as if she were a daughter. I'd told Robert she was good for Mark, ambitious, confident. I'd believed kindness would earn love. It hadn't. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I think I should pack my things." Lauren tilted her head. "Oh, you don't have to do that. We've already taken care of it." I froze. "What do you mean?" Mark looked up suddenly, guilt clouding his face. "Mom, we just thought it would be easier for you, less stress. Your suitcases are by the door." "Easier," I repeated. Lauren nodded. "We arranged for a driver tomorrow morning. That way you can get to the cabin safely before dark." I turned toward the hallway. There they were, 4 suitcases, lined neatly by the door, tagged and zipped. 43 years of life reduced to luggage. Behind me, Lauren spoke again, her tone breezy. "The keys are in the side pocket of the blue one. Drive carefully, Lydia. Those mountain roads can be tricky for someone your age." Her words followed me like cold air as I stepped toward the door. My hand lingered on the frame, tracing the faint dent where Mark had once crashed his toy truck years ago. I'd left it there, a small imperfection in a house full of memories. Now it felt like the only honest thing left in the room. I didn't look back when I walked out. Rain had begun to fall by the time I zipped the last suitcase. It pattered against the windows, steady and unhurried, as if the sky itself were grieving for me. The taxi idled at the curb, its wipers moving back and forth like the slow rhythm of a clock. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, emptiness. I stood there for a long moment, taking in the walls lined with family photographs, the ones I'd framed myself through the years. Mark in his graduation gown. Robert holding our first dog, the 3 of us at the lake. Each picture felt like proof of a life I thought would never fracture. Mark stayed upstairs pretending to be busy. Lauren hovered near the kitchen doorway, arms folded, her eyes politely avoiding mine. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't break something further. When the driver lifted my bags into the trunk, the sound of the car door closing echoed louder than it should have. I sat in the back seat, my hands folded tightly in my lap, and watched the house shrink behind the misted glass. 43 years of marriage, 35 years of motherhood, a lifetime of dinners, birthdays, and repairs all fading into rain. As the taxi turned the corner and the white porch disappeared from view, I pressed my palm to the window. The glass was cold, unyielding. Somewhere beyond the gray, the mountains waited. I didn't yet know if I was running from my life or back toward it. The drive from Asheville to Lake Lure took nearly 3 hours. The rain thinned to mist as the taxi climbed into the mountains, the world turning quieter with every mile. Pines dripped with water, their dark trunks gleaming against the fog. When the driver asked if I wanted to stop for coffee, I shook my head. I just wanted to get it over with, to see the place Robert had left me, to know exactly how much of my life had been reduced to a forgotten cabin. When we finally turned off the highway, the road narrowed to a dirt path half swallowed by weeds. The taxi's tires crunched over gravel, and for a moment, I thought we'd taken a wrong turn. Then through the thinning trees, I saw it. The cabin stood by the edge of the lake, small but steady, against the gray sky. Its porch sagged a little at one corner, but the steps looked newly sanded and the roofline was clean. I blinked, certain I was imagining it. The place I remembered had been abandoned long ago, its shutters crooked, the door swollen from years of rain. But this cabin looked cared for. The driver hauled my suitcases to the porch and hesitated. "You sure someone hasn't been staying here, ma'am?" he asked. I'm sure I said, though I wasn't. When his taillights disappeared down the road, silence settled around me. Only the faint ripple of water against the dock broke the stillness. I unlocked the door, expecting the stale air of long neglect. Instead, a faint scent of pine and soap greeted me. The floorboards shone faintly in the lamplight. A stack of firewood waited neatly by the stone fireplace, and a wool blanket lay folded across the sofa. Someone had been here. My breath caught as I moved deeper inside. Everything was simple but clean. Fresh linens, a half-full jar of coffee beans on the counter, even a vase with dried wildflowers near the window. It didn't feel like an empty place. It felt like a place expecting someone. On the mantel above the fireplace, a single photograph drew my eye. Robert stood beside an older woman I didn't recognize. He looked young, barely 20. The woman beside him had kind eyes, her hand resting on his shoulder. The photo was dated in Robert's handwriting, with Rose 1962. I traced my finger over the frame. Rose. The name stirred something faint and familiar, though I couldn't place it. Robert had never spoken of a rose, not in all our years together. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, the sound blending with the steady drip of water from the eaves outside. I sat on the couch, the quiet pressing close around me. For the first time since leaving Asheville, I didn't feel angry or humiliated. I felt unsettled. Someone had kept this place alive. Someone had known I'd be here. I stared again at Robert's face in the photograph, at the faint smile that seemed to hold a secret, and realized my husband had prepared something far more than an old cabin. He had prepared a question I didn't yet know how to answer. By evening, the mist had lifted from the lake. The air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wet pine. I'd found an old kettle on the stove and was just pouring hot water into a chipped mug when a knock came at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps that startled me enough to spill a little water on the counter. No one was supposed to know I was here. I hesitated before opening it. On the porch stood an older man, maybe in his 70s, tall and a little stooped, holding a covered dish in both hands. His raincoat dripped onto the planks. He smiled gently beneath a gray mustache. "Mrs. Harcourt?" he asked. I nodded, still gripping the edge of the door. "Yes, I'm Eli Brennan. I live just down the hill." He held up the dish. "Figured you might not have had time to fix supper. It's stew, nothing fancy." The warmth of his tone softened my guard. I stepped aside and let him in. The cabin light fell across his face, lined but kind, the sort of expression that spoke of a life outdoors. He set the dish on the counter and looked around with quiet familiarity. "Robert said you'd be coming." The words froze me. "You spoke to my husband." He nodded slowly. "About a week before he passed. He drove up one morning, stayed 3 days. Said he wanted to get the place ready, asked me to keep an eye on it for a while. I pulled out a chair, my knees suddenly weak. He never told me he'd been here." Eli shrugged gently. Said he wanted it to be a surprise. I didn't pry. He gave a small smile. Robert was a good man. Thought ahead about everything. I looked around the cabin again, the firewood stacked neatly, the clean floors, the photograph on the mantel. Robert had known I'd come here. He'd known exactly what I'd need. Eli studied me for a moment, as if deciding whether to say more. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out a folded note. He left a message with me just in case you ever showed up looking lost. I took it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable, Robert's steady and strong. "Eli, tell Lydia to look under the kitchen table when she's ready. That was all." Eli chuckled softly. Didn't make much sense to me, but he was insistent. Said she'd know when the time was right. I stared at the words until they blurred. Under the table, I murmured, "Old floorboards creak, but they hold things better than safes," Eli said. Then, sensing my exhaustion, he reached for his coat. "You'll be all right out here, Mrs. Harcourt. The lake keeps good company. Thank you," I said, though the words barely reached him before he stepped into the night. When the door closed, the quiet returned deeper than before. I set the note on the table beside my mug and looked down at the worn pine beneath my feet. The kettle whistled again softly on the stove, but I didn't move. Robert had left me something, and whatever it was, it waited just beneath where I stood. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert's handwriting on the folded note, the words looping over and over in my mind. "Look under the kitchen table when you're ready." But what did ready even mean? Ready to forgive, ready to remember, or simply ready to face the truth? The cabin creaked softly as the wind came off the lake. The sound was familiar. Wood settling the house, breathing, but tonight it carried a different weight. I lit the small lamp by the stove and made coffee, more for the comfort of routine than for the caffeine. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding me. The table sat in the center of the room, old pine, scarred by years of use. Robert and I had eaten breakfast there on our honeymoon, laughing over burnt toast and instant coffee. The same table still here after half a lifetime. I got down on my knees and ran my hand along the underside. The wood felt cool and slightly rough. Near the corner, one plank dipped under my touch, subtle but noticeable. I pressed harder. It shifted. My pulse quickened. The board lifted with a faint groan, revealing a narrow hollow between the joists. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in thick oilcloth, the kind Robert used to protect his field maps. My hands trembled as I pulled it free. The air inside the hidden space smelled faintly of cedar and dust, not rot. Whatever he'd hidden here, he'd meant it to last. I unwrapped the cloth carefully, layer by layer, until the object revealed itself, a small metal box, no bigger than a loaf of bread. The lid was tarnished but intact, the kind of practical container Robert would have chosen. I carried it to the table and sat down staring at it under the lamplight. My breath came shallow, part fear, part anticipation. Inside the contents were arranged with Robert's usual precision. A stack of documents tied with twine, a few yellowed photographs, and resting at the very top, a ring. It was exquisite. An emerald set in a delicate band of gold surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light in soft glimmers. I'd never seen it before. Robert had never been one for jewelry beyond his wedding band. For a long moment, I could only stare. The green stone seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly with reflected lamplight. Beneath it lay an envelope addressed in Robert's unmistakable handwriting, for Lydia. My throat tightened as I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his script, neat and deliberate, every stroke firm. My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to tell you everything in person. You've always trusted me to handle the practical things, the finances, the property, the details of a life we built together. But there was one part of that life I never explained because I wanted to wait until the time was right. I stopped and drew a shaky breath, the words blurring for a moment. This cabin was never just a retreat. It was my grandmother Rose's land passed down to me when she died. She wasn't family by blood, but by choice. When my parents died, she took me in. She raised me, taught me everything I know about geology, about the patience of rock and earth. I promised her I'd protect this land not for what's on it, but for what it represents. She believed there was value here beyond money. She was right, though not in the way either of us expected. The letter went on, Robert's voice emerging clearer with each line. Before I died, I had the property surveyed one last time. What we thought was simple ground turned out to hold something extraordinary beneath it. I don't want to alarm you, but I need you to know that this land isn't worthless no matter what anyone says. There are documents in this box that explain everything. Trust them and trust yourself. When the time comes, speak to the lawyer I've listed in the papers. Her name is Naomi Chen in Asheville. She'll help you understand what Rose left behind and what I've tried to protect for you. My hands trembled as I reached for the stack of documents beneath the letter. They were property deeds, survey reports, geological notations, maps marked in Robert's careful handwriting. Some were recent, others decades old. The last page bore a signature from a geological firm in Raleigh, dated only months before Robert's death. Words leapt out at me, mineral survey deposit confirmed, estimated high-value yield. I pressed a hand to my mouth, unable to breathe for a moment. What had he done? I reached for the ring again, turning it between my fingers. Inside the band, faint engraving caught the light. For the woman who keeps the light. It felt like a heartbeat between my palms, his somehow echoing through time. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the trees against the cabin walls. The lake was still reflecting the pale glow of the moon. The quiet no longer felt empty. It felt expectant, like the pause before an answer. I gathered the papers back into the box, careful to place the ring on top. The metal felt cool against my skin. Robert's letter lay beside it, the words still open on the table. Whatever I had lost in Asheville, home pride family, I could feel something else beginning here. Not comfort, not yet, but a pulse of purpose. Robert had hidden more than memories in this place. He had hidden a truth he knew I'd have to find alone. I sat for a long time without moving, the letter still trembling in my hands. The lamplight flickered across Robert's handwriting, firm, deliberate, so unmistakably his that for a moment I could almost hear his voice again. Outside, the wind had died. The lake was perfectly still, like a mirror waiting to show me what I had refused to see. I began to read from the beginning once more, this time out loud, my voice barely above a whisper. My dearest Lydia, if you're holding this, it means I'm gone. And I know what that means for you. You've always been the strong one, but strength doesn't keep away the loneliness. I wish I'd had more time to explain everything, to prepare you properly. but I trust that you'll understand now the way you always have." He had underlined the next sentence, "The cabin isn't what everyone believes it to be." When I was a boy, Rose told me this land carried more value than gold. She was right, but it's not the kind of value people think of first. Beneath these hills, Lydia, there's something extraordinary. I had a geological survey done last year. The report confirmed what Rose suspected more than 50 years ago. This land holds one of the largest lithium deposits on the East Coast. I stopped reading. My mind struggled to catch up with the words on the page. Lithium Robert had spent his career studying mineral formations, but he'd never spoken about this place in any scientific way. The cabin had always been a refuge, not an investment. I read on. "Lithium is changing everything, Lydia. Electric cars, energy storage, it's become more valuable than oil in some markets. The people who know about it will come for it, and they won't come gently. That's why I left the deeds, the mineral rights, and every document tied to this land in your name alone. It's protected under your trust. Mark doesn't know. I couldn't trust him with this, not after the choices he's made these past few years." My throat closed as I reached that part. I love our son, but he's drifted, Lydia. The man I raised to respect hard work has started to see the world in numbers and leverage. He's good at what he does, but he's learned to measure people the same way he measures property, by what they can give him. And I've watched you carry that burden quietly, pretending you didn't see it. You always forgive too quickly. I pressed my fingers to my lips, fighting the ache that rose in my chest. Robert had seen it. He had seen everything I'd tried to ignore, the way Mark stopped calling unless he needed money, the way Lauren's compliments always came wrapped in small cruelties. "I'm sorry I didn't confront it sooner," the letter continued. "But I needed time to make sure you'd be safe. If this land had stayed in both our names, Mark could have pressured you into selling it after I was gone, and once it's sold, there's no turning back. I couldn't let that happen. Rose made me promise to protect her legacy, and now I'm passing that promise to you." The page blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and read on. "There's a woman in Asheville, Naomi Chen, an attorney. She knows everything. She'll help you navigate what's coming. I've left her the full geological report and the legal documentation confirming your ownership. She's trustworthy. I chose her carefully. If anyone contacts you about the property, tell Naomi first. No one else." He had added a line at the margin in smaller script. "Trust your instincts. They've always been better than mine." I could hear him saying that. I could see the way his brow creased when he was writing reports at his desk, how he'd pause before underlining something important. I'd seen those gestures 1,000 times, but now each one felt like a message left in code for me to decipher alone. You might wonder why I didn't tell you while I was alive. The truth is, I didn't want this knowledge to burden you too soon. I wanted you to have time to grieve, not to guard. And maybe selfishly, I wanted to believe we still had more time together to visit this place one last time, to see the lake before winter. I did come back, you know, a week before the end. I needed to make sure it was ready for you. Eli helped me fix the porch and clean the fireplace. He's a good man. He'll look out for you if you let him. I closed my eyes. I could almost picture it, Robert here in his old work jacket, brushing leaves off the dock, setting wood by the hearth, knowing exactly how the cabin would look when I arrived. He had left traces of himself in every inch of this place. The letter went on for several more pages, filled with details about the trust, the land, and instructions for contacting Naomi. But what stopped me was the final paragraph, written in darker ink, as if he'd gone back and added it after everything else. "Lydia, I know what Mark and Lauren will say. They'll tell you the cabin is a burden. They'll call it old, useless, a relic. Don't listen. It's more than a house, it's proof of who you are. I've watched you hold this family together for decades, quietly, without reward. This time, let the reward be yours. Let it free you. My tears fell onto the paper, blurring the word free until it looked like forever. If they turn against you, and I pray they won't remember this, what you own now isn't just land. It's a promise. To protect, to rebuild, to remind the world that love can be stronger than greed. Whatever happens, know that I loved you in every possible way a man can love a woman. It was signed simply, Always Robert. The lamplight flickered as the wind rose again, whispering through the cracks around the windows. I folded the letter carefully, afraid to damage it, and placed it back inside the box. My hands still shook, but the trembling felt different now, not fear, but the weight of understanding. Robert had loved me enough to plan for my survival in a world that had already forgotten kindness. He had known that even love could be rewritten into contracts, bank accounts, and signatures, and he had rewritten them back in my favor. The humiliation I'd felt in Mark's house only days earlier seemed distant now, small against what I held in my hands. Robert's final act wasn't revenge, it was protection. And it asked something of me in return to become the keeper of his promise. The night deepened outside, and the reflection of the lake shimmered through the window like glass. Somewhere within that stillness, I could almost hear his voice again, low, calm, certain as if he were standing just behind me, reminding me of the truth he'd left behind, that love, when it is real, outlasts the living. The phone rang just as the morning light reached across the kitchen table. I had been rereading Robert's letter, tracing the ink, as if it could still warm my fingers. The name on the screen made my pulse pause. Mark. I hesitated before answering. Mom. His voice was soft, too controlled. I've been trying to reach you. Are you all right up there? Lauren's worried. Worried? I repeated, keeping my tone even. That's kind of her, he cleared his throat. Look about what happened the other day. Things got tense. I shouldn't have let it go that far. The words sounded rehearsed, distant. Behind them was something sharper, a tone I recognized from years of business calls, overheard at family dinners. I've been thinking, he continued. That place must be hard to manage on your own. It's isolated, no medical care nearby, probably needs repairs. Maybe it's best to sell it, move closer to us. We can help you find a condo near the city, something nice, comfortable. I looked around the cabin. The morning sun touched the photograph on the mantel, the ring glinting faintly beside Robert's letter. Sell it, I asked softly. Well, yes, Mark said quickly. You'd make good money. And it's not really safe for you to live out there alone. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch until it made him uneasy. I'll think about it, I said finally. Good, he replied, relief audible in his voice. We'll talk more soon. Of course. When the call ended, I set the phone down and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, he was the one waiting on my answer. 2 days later, I drove into Asheville with Robert's letter and the metal box resting on the passenger seat beside me. The mountain road curved gently through fog, but the farther I went, the clearer the air became. For the first time since his death, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of away from it. Naomi Chen's office sat in an old brick building near Pack Square, its tall windows overlooking the city streets below. The receptionist greeted me warmly and led me into a small meeting room that smelled faintly of paper and cedar oil. A few minutes later, a woman entered. Slender, mid-50s hair, silvering at the edges, eyes alert, but kind. Mrs. Harcourt, she said, extending her hand. I'm Naomi. Robert spoke very highly of you. Then you knew about all this, I said, gesturing to the metal box. She smiled faintly. Not everything, but enough to know he wanted you protected. She opened a folder from her briefcase and began laying out documents with the care of someone handling fragile history. Your husband was meticulous. He transferred the mineral rights and full ownership of the property solely to your name 2 years ago. It's airtight. No challenge will hold. I felt my chest tighten with something between disbelief and relief. So it's really mine entirely. She looked up from her notes. And more valuable than you probably realize. I watched as she spread out the geological surveys across the polished table. Colored markings outlined the area beneath the lake and surrounding hills. The lithium deposits are extensive. 3 independent surveys confirmed the yield. Based on current market demand, leasing the mineral rights could generate around $10 to $12 million annually for at least 20 years. The numbers barely registered. $10 million a year. The sum didn't sound real. It was too far removed from the life I'd lived, from grocery lists and utility bills and quiet frugality. Naomi leaned back slightly. You don't have to sell. Robert insisted I prepare alternative agreements, ethical extraction, partnerships, environmental protections, community reinvestment clauses. He wanted this handled carefully. He didn't just want wealth for you, Mrs. Harcourt. He wanted purpose. I looked up. Purpose. She nodded, her tone softening. He said you'd spent your life raising a family, holding things together, helping others find their way. He thought it was time you had the means to decide what matters most to you. I stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. Outside, the afternoon light had shifted golden and clean. Naomi continued, if you lease responsibly, the income will be more than enough to live comfortably anywhere you wish. But Robert made it clear he hoped you'd use at least part of it for something meaningful, something that lasts. I ran my fingers over the edge of the table, feeling the weight of the papers beneath them. He didn't tell me what that meant. He wanted you to decide. For the next hour, she walked me through the legal structure, the trusts, the safety clauses. Every page bore Robert's signature, his planning, his foresight, his quiet love written in the language of law. When we finished, Naomi closed the folder gently. He once said you were the kind of woman who never realized how much power she already had. Maybe now's the time to learn. Her words sank deep, settling somewhere between grief and resolve. Power. It wasn't a word I'd ever claimed for myself. But sitting there, surrounded by proof of what Robert had built for me, I began to feel its quiet weight, steady, not heavy. As I left the office, Naomi walked me to the door. I'll handle everything, she said. When the first payments come through, we'll set up the account transfers. You'll have complete control, thank you, I said. Outside, the city hummed with life tourists walking with coffee cups, a street musician playing guitar near the corner. I stood there for a moment, holding the folder against my chest. The world felt wide again, not as a place to escape from, but as one waiting to be re-entered. I looked up at the blue stretch of sky above the mountains and thought of Robert's final line, "Let it free you." For the first time, I understood what he meant. Security wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of what I might finally build. That night, the cabin felt both larger and smaller than ever. The fire in the hearth burned low, its light spilling across the wooden floor in shifting gold. I sat in the armchair with Robert's letter in my lap, the paper soft now from how many times I'd unfolded it. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like slow breath. I read the words again, every stroke of his pen, familiar, almost alive. It was the same voice that once called me from across crowded rooms, that whispered promises against my shoulder when life was still new and unscarred. I could almost hear him in the crackle of the fire. When I reached the line about Mark, He's learned to measure people the same way he measures property. I paused. The ache that had sharpened inside me for weeks softened. Robert hadn't written those words in anger. He had written them out of grief. Grief for what our son had become, for what we'd lost in him. The fire popped softly. I looked toward the mantel at the photograph of Robert standing beside the old woman named Rose. There was kindness in her expression, the kind that endures longer than pride or pain. I wondered what she'd told him all those years ago about patience, about the difference between power and peace. When I finally rose to stir the fire, my reflection flickered in the window, an older woman, lined but unbroken. The night outside was cold, but I no longer felt it. Something inside me had shifted quiet, but certain. I thought of Mark as a child running barefoot across our yard in the summer twilight, his laughter echoing down the hill. He used to bring me wildflowers with roots still clinging to dirt, proud of every crushed stem. He hadn't known then what money was or what it could make people forget. Somewhere beneath all the layers life had built on top of him, that boy still existed. It would have been easy to let bitterness take root, to use this wealth, this discovery as a weapon. But I knew Robert would have hated that. He'd built every part of this plan, not out of revenge, but protection, out of love. He wanted me safe, yes, but he also wanted me whole. I folded the letter carefully and set it back inside the box. The emerald ring caught the firelight again, flashing briefly like a heartbeat. For the first time since leaving Asheville, I slipped it onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. The fire had burned down to embers. I added a new log and watched as the flames caught climbing in slow, deliberate waves. Outside the lake shimmered under the faint rise of the moon, a silver path across dark water. I stood there a long while, feeling the quiet settle around me. Not emptiness, but peace. Tomorrow I would begin the next part. I didn't yet know what shape it would take, only that it would be guided by something other than anger. Mercy wasn't weakness. It was clarity. And if I wanted to reclaim my life, it couldn't begin with punishment. As the firelight faded, I leaned back into the chair, the ring warm now against my skin. For the first time in years, I let myself drift into sleep, without fear of what the morning might bring. In my dream, Robert stood at the edge of the lake, younger, smiling the way he did when everything was still possible. Behind him, the water glowed like dawn. When I reached for him, he didn't vanish. He only said, "You know what to do," and I did. Morning came soft and gray, the kind of light that blurs edges and makes the world seem gentler than it is. I stood by the window with a cup of coffee, watching fog drift across the lake. The ring on my finger caught a faint glint of gold in the pale light. I thought of Robert's letter again, of the care behind every word, and of Mark's voice on the phone days earlier, measured, polite, calculating. There was still a part of me that wanted to reach the son I had raised, the boy who once believed kindness could fix anything. But there was another part now, steadier, that understood some lessons require silence to echo. I picked up the phone before I could change my mind. It rang twice. "Mom?" His tone was surprised but cautious. "Good morning, Mark," I said evenly. "I was thinking it's time we talked." Properly, a pause. Talk? Yes, about the future. "Why don't you and Lauren come for dinner tomorrow evening? The cabin's quiet, but it has a good table and a better view than that city apartment of yours." He hesitated long enough for me to imagine the flicker of confusion on his face. Then his voice softened. "You sure, Mom? I mean, that's great. Lauren will be happy to see you. She's been worried, I'm sure," I said. 7:00. When I hung up, the room fell silent again, except for the slow crackle of the fire. I looked at the table where Robert's letter still rested, folded neatly beside the box of documents. Everything he'd built for me led to this moment, not revenge, but clarity. I began to tidy the cabin, wiping the counter, setting the old china on the shelves. By the time the afternoon light slanted through the window, the place looked warm, lived in, almost welcoming. It would be just as Robert had left it, peaceful, steady, and waiting for truth to sit at the table. By the time the clock struck 7, the cabin was glowing with a gentle warmth that came from more than the fire. The table was set with Robert's old china white porcelain, trimmed in gold edges, slightly chipped, but still elegant. The pot roast had been slow cooking for hours, filling the air with the scent of thyme and onion. I had opened one of the good bottles of red wine Robert used to save for when something mattered. Tonight mattered. Headlights flickered through the trees, then went dark. I watched from the window as Mark's sleek SUV pulled up by the porch. Lauren stepped out first, immaculate as ever, her blonde hair pinned up her coat, perfectly tailored. Mark followed, adjusting his tie as though arriving for a business meeting instead of dinner with his mother. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, his voice carrying that careful mixture of affection and unease. "It's good to see you." Lauren leaned forward to kiss my cheek, the air between us cold despite her perfume. "This place looks cozy," she said, scanning the room with polite detachment. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Dinner's ready." We sat. The fire crackled softly while they filled their plates. For several minutes, the only sounds were the clink of silverware and Lauren's polite chatter about nursery paint colors and real estate prices. Mark nodded along, though his eyes kept drifting toward the old photograph on the mantel, the one of Robert and the woman named Rose. That picture, he said, finally breaking the surface calm. "Who is she?" I set down my fork. "That's Rose Meredith. She raised your father after his parents died." Lauren smiled faintly. "I've never heard of her." "Family by choice," I said. "She left this land to your father decades ago. He promised to protect it, and before he died, he passed that promise to me." Mark frowned. "Passed it to you?" "Yes." I reached under the table and brought out the metal box. It made a dull sound as I set it between the plates. "Your father left more than memories here." Lauren's eyes sharpened. "What is that history?" I said. I untied the string and unfolded the papers with deliberate care. The first was the geological survey, the ink still crisp despite its age. Colored lines and coded symbols ran across the page. Mark leaned closer. His voice dropped. "Mom, what is this proof?" I said softly. "Of what your father discovered. This land sits above a lithium deposit large enough to change everything you thought you knew about value." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the fire. Then Lauren laughed, sharp and nervous. "That's impossible. That cabin, it's worthless," I finished for her. "That's what you said before you packed my suitcases." Her face froze color draining from her cheeks. Mark reached for the document, scanning it quickly. His hand trembled. "This can't be real," he whispered. "There's no way. It's very real," I said. "And it's mine. Every acre, every right, every mineral beneath it." Lauren's voice rose. "You can't possibly manage something like this. You need guidance, someone to help you negotiate. This could be dangerous complex." "Mark can—" "No," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "Your father left instructions. Everything is legally secure. The leases, the protections, even the environmental clauses. I've already spoken to his attorney." Mark's eyes lifted to mine, wide disbelieving. "You spoke to Mom when 2 days ago? Naomi Chen. You remember her name now, don't you?" He sank back in his chair. The paper in his hands quivered slightly, as if the weight of it burned. Lauren forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, this is wonderful news for the family, isn't it?" "This isn't the family's," I said quietly. "This is mine." She blinked, unable to hide the flicker of fury beneath her painted calm. "Surely you don't mean I do. And before you ask, the wealth won't go to you or to Mark or to anyone who values me by what I can give them. I've decided to put it toward something else. Something that matters." Mark looked at me as if seeing a stranger. "Mom, you're serious, completely." He opened his mouth, closed it again. His shoulders slumped. "Dad knew," he murmured. "He knew what you'd need after he was gone." "Yes," I said. "He did." Lauren pushed back her chair abruptly. "I can't believe this. All this time, and you never said anything." "There was nothing to say," I replied. "You made your opinions of this place quite clear. But Robert saw beyond appearances." The words hung between us. The fire popped once, scattering a few sparks. Mark's gaze fell to the ring on my finger, the green emerald catching the light. "That was hers, wasn't it?" he asked quietly. "It was," I said. "And now it's mine." A reminder that some inheritances are earned, not given. He nodded slowly, then looked away, the lines of his face heavy with something that wasn't just regret. It was recognition. Lauren reached for her glass, her hand shaking slightly. I think she said, voice tight, "We should go." "Of course," I replied, rising from my chair. "Drive carefully. The road is steep when you're not watching where you're going." Mark stood hesitant. For a moment, I thought he might say something more, but he only murmured, "Good night, Mom," before following Lauren to the door. When the car's headlights disappeared down the road, I returned to the table. The plates sat untouched, the wine glasses half full. The survey papers glowed softly in the firelight, their edges curling with warmth. Across from me, the empty chairs faced the truth they'd left behind. The next morning dawned pale and cold, a thin layer of mist rolling over the lake. I sat at the kitchen table with Naomi Chen's papers spread before me, steam rising from my untouched coffee. The night had left me drained, but not uncertain. For the first time in years, my path was clear, not out of anger, but purpose. At 9 o'clock sharp, Naomi's car appeared on the gravel drive. She stepped out wearing her charcoal gray coat and a look of quiet determination. "Good morning, Mrs. Harcourt," she greeted as she entered. "You said it was time." "It is," I said. "Let's finish what Robert started." We worked for over an hour reviewing the documents she had drafted. The new will was precise, every clause deliberate. It named me as the founder and sole trustee of the Rose Harcourt Foundation for Women, a charitable trust dedicated to providing housing education and legal assistance to women displaced or disregarded by their families. The foundation would be funded entirely by the mineral rights income, an inheritance transformed into a lifeline for others. I signed the preliminary forms with steady hands, feeling something shift inside me. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of the woman I'd been before the world convinced me to shrink. Halfway through, tires crunched outside on the gravel again. Naomi glanced toward the window. Expecting company I already knew. When I opened the door, Mark stood there, tie, crooked eyes tense. Lauren hovered behind him, her face tight with defiance. "Mom," Mark began, "we need to talk." Naomi rose politely from her chair as they entered. "Good morning, I'm Naomi Chen." Lauren's gaze narrowed. "You're the lawyer, aren't you?" "Yes," Naomi replied smoothly. "I'm handling Mrs. Harcourt's estate planning." Lauren scoffed. "Estate planning?" "She's not dying. Planning doesn't require dying," I said evenly. Only foresight. Mark stepped forward, lowering his voice. Mom, listen. Last night, things got heated. But we can still work this out. You don't need to give everything away. I'm not giving it away, I replied. I'm directing it towards something that matters. Lauren crossed her arms. A charity. You're donating millions to strangers while your own family gets nothing. I met her gaze steadily. Strangers, I said, might value it more. Color rose in her cheeks. You're being manipulated, she snapped, turning on Naomi. She's taking advantage of you. Naomi's expression didn't change. Mrs. Harcourt made her decision long before I arrived. My role is simply to ensure her wishes are protected. Mark's voice broke through the tension, softer pleading. Mom, please. You can't just erase us from your life. Think about the baby, your grandchild. Don't you want her to have a future? I took a breath. Yes. And I want her to grow up knowing that her grandmother believed a woman's worth isn't decided by who depends on her, but by who she helps stand on their own. He swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. Lauren stepped closer to me, voice trembling with fury. You'll regret this, she hissed. When people find out what you've done, they'll think you're senile, vindictive. Let them think what they wish, I interrupted quietly. I've spent a lifetime being polite. I'm done seeking permission for peace. Naomi slid the final document across the table. Mrs. Harcourt, this is the last signature. I lifted the pen, my hand steady. The ink flowed across the page in clean, unhurried lines. When I set it down, I exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of held breath. Lauren turned to Mark, whispering sharply, but he said nothing. He only looked at me, really looked, and I saw the moment realization dawned. The struggle was over. He understood now that control and love were not the same thing, and that I no longer needed either from him. Naomi gathered the papers, slid them into her briefcase, and rose. It's done, she said simply. Outside, the mist was lifting. The lake shimmered under a soft morning sun, and the reflection of the cabin glowed golden on the surface. As the car drove away, I remained by the table, the pen still resting beside my hand. I wasn't trembling anymore. Power, I realized, didn't have to roar. It could exist in quiet, measured decisions that no one could undo. For the first time, I felt entirely my own. Mark came back alone the next afternoon. No polished coat, no forced confidence. He looked smaller somehow standing at the edge of the porch, with his hands shoved into his pockets. I opened the door before he could knock. Mom, he said quietly. Come in, I replied. The fire was already lit and the cabin felt warm, despite the gray sky pressing against the windows. He didn't sit right away, only stood there staring at the framed photograph of Robert and me that rested on the mantel. I didn't sleep last night, he began. Lauren's furious. But that's nothing new. I just needed to say I'm sorry. I said nothing. He turned toward me, eyes raw. I was cruel. I let her talk to you like that. I let her make me believe money mattered more than you did. I don't even know when it happened. You don't owe me confessions, Mark, I said softly. Just choices. He nodded slowly. I saw the papers this morning, the foundation, the trust. You've built something bigger than I ever could have imagined. His voice faltered. Dad would have been proud. Your father believed in redemption, I said. So do I. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. He took a step closer, the light catching the tired lines around his eyes. Are we finished then? You and me? I shook my head. No, we're beginning again. Just not in the same house, not on the same terms. He looked down, his hands tightening. I don't deserve that kind of grace. No one does, I said. That's why it's called love. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock above the hearth. When he finally moved toward the door, his voice was barely a whisper. I'll call you Mom. Maybe we can try again slowly. I'd like that, I said. But this time you'll come as my son, not as my judge. He nodded, and for a moment I saw the boy he'd once been, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the porch steps. I stood there for a while, listening to the quiet he left behind. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful, the kind that comes when love no longer needs to be earned. Spring came early that year, soft and green across the hills. The old train depot in Asheville had been transformed. Brick-cleaned windows restored sunlight spilling across newly painted walls. Above the front door, carved into a wooden plaque, the words read, "The Rose Harcourt Foundation for Women." I stood inside the entryway, surrounded by faces, young, old, hopeful, frightened, all of them gathered for something that had once existed only in Robert's dreams, and my courage to continue it. The center wasn't large, just 6 rooms and a shared kitchen, a place for women starting over. But it was enough. Sometimes enough can feel like everything. Naomi stood near the reception desk, elegant as always, holding a folder against her chest. "It's beautiful, Lydia," she said. "You did this exactly the way he wanted." I smiled. "No," I said softly. "The way we wanted." Across the room, Eli Brennan adjusted his tie awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, in anything that wasn't flannel. He caught my eye and grinned. "Didn't think I'd see this place filled so fast," he said. "Your Robert would have been proud." "I think he's here," I replied, glancing toward the open window. The breeze drifted in, carrying the faint scent of lilac from the courtyard. For a heartbeat, I could almost hear his laugh, the low, familiar sound that used to fill our kitchen on Sunday mornings. A small group of women stood nearby, reading the mission statement printed on the wall to offer shelter, education, and dignity to those rebuilding from loss. One of them, a young mother with a baby on her hip, met my eyes and smiled shyly. I nodded back, my throat tightening. When the ribbon was finally cut, applause filled the room, soft but steady. I looked up at the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the golden light dusting everything it touched. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise kept, a circle closed between past and present, between loss and renewal. As the ceremony continued, I stepped outside for a moment. The wind lifted gently through the magnolia trees, brushing my cheek, like a hand I still knew by heart. "Thank you, Robert," I whispered, "for believing I could finish what you began." The evening settled over Lake Lure in shades of amber and blue. The air smelled faintly of pine and rain, the kind of stillness that feels earned. I had returned to the cabin for the first time in weeks, the place that had once symbolized exile and now felt like home again. The lake mirrored the fading sky, smooth and unbroken. On the porch, the wooden boards creaked softly beneath my feet. I set down a cup of tea and ran my fingers along the porch railing, tracing the grain of the wood Robert had sanded himself years ago. Every inch of this cabin carried his touch, steady, patient, quietly enduring. Inside, the day's mail sat unopened on the table beside a stack of foundation letters. The Rose Harcourt Center had been running for 3 months now, full of laughter, the sound of women rediscovering their voices. Every time I visited, I saw pieces of myself reflected in their courage. Healing, I'd learned, was less about forgetting and more about repurposing the hurt into something that mattered. The sky deepened to violet. I reached for the switch by the door, the one Robert had installed long ago, with his usual precision. The bulb flickered to life, casting a warm circle of gold across the porch. It had once been a beacon for his return from late nights at the university, then for Mark's visits home from college. For years, I'd left it on out of habit, out of hope. Tonight, I turned it on for another reason entirely. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. A single message lit the screen. "Mark, Mom, can we start over?" I stared at the words for a long moment, the soft light of the porch lamp glowing against the glass. There was no anger in his message, only weariness, the tone of someone who had finally stopped trying to win and started trying to understand. I typed slowly, choosing each word as carefully as Robert once measured his steps around this porch. Me, this light isn't for waiting anymore, it's for peace. The message sent with a small chime. I watched the screen dim, then looked back toward the lake. The reflection of the porch light shimmered on the water, steady and calm. Somewhere across the mountains, my son was reading those words, and for the first time in years, I hoped he'd understand them. The night grew quiet again. I sat on the porch swing sipping my tea, letting the rhythm of the crickets and the gentle lap of water fill the silence. I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. The light above me burned softly into the evening, not as a signal for anyone to return, but as a promise kept to the man who had loved me, to the woman I had become, and to the peace that had finally found its way home.